name is Margaret Adele, and I am a bit of a nerd. And today, I decided it was high time to bring some of my favorite nerdy interests together. Indie books and Dungeons & Dragons. But also, make it gay. Because I am a bisexual paladin main who's also a bookish hipster. So, we are going to be talking about indie books that give me the same kind of vibes as a really fun Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Now you might be wondering, Margaret, isn't that just a high fantasy book? Or even better, doesn't Dungeons & Dragons already have books set in their world? And you're not entirely wrong with that. However, one, most campaigns don't strictly to rules as written. It's very much their guidelines type of thing. And two, there's a kind of levity or goofiness in Dungeons & Dragons that a lot of high fantasy books don't have. High fantasy books, especially like the bigger, thicker ones with all the deep lore, tend to take themselves very seriously, whereas a lot of Dungeons & Dragons players, while they will have serious moments, yes, also know that we're sitting around pretending to be fantasy characters. This is a little weird, and they go with it. For example, I have this Oath of Redemption paladin who once had to convince an entire thieves guild to save their captain from execution without killing anyone, and it was this big, tense moral moment, and yes, they're opposing us, but they're not actually the bad guys, and it was this big thing. I also have this zombie cleric who would be too stupid to live if she wasn't already dead. And she literally can't remember anyone's names, so she gives them stupid nicknames to remember them by, including the person she brought back from the dead, who is just forever the corpse in her head. So, Dungeons & Dragons campaigns tend to have that mix of super serious, but also low-key kind of goofy. So, I have compiled a list of 6 books that give some kind of vibes from the campaigns that I have played or the jokes about Dungeons & Dragons that you can see on DnD TikTok. If you play Dungeons & Dragons, I highly suggest you get on DnD TikTok. It is such a fun community. Just don't, mind the dramas. Whatever. So let's get right into it. First up is All the King's Traitors by Keelan Rivers. This is a queer norm high fantasy, and it's kind of hard to explain the synopsis, even though the synopsis has one of the best bylines that I've ever read, and that is, "You would be wise to question your god." This is all about a world ruled by an evil tyrant god king, and all of our main characters are kind of disparate at the beginning. They're all separate, going on like they're doing their own things, and slowly coming together. So essentially you are seeing the party being formed, which is why the synopsis reads really vague and really weirdly, because it's basically trying to explain to you all of the different characters that are going to become part of this ensemble cast. But we do have a young boy with an anxiety disorder that uncovers strange magical powers, and we have a dark prince that is undoubtedly going to go through his Zuko redemption arc, and I'm here for it. But I do like this world because, one, it is queer norm. Like I said, there is a noble character who is admittedly a side character, but basically he's trans, and it's just not an issue. Like, he's an out trans man in the nobility, and it's just accepted. Like, it's not a thing. And there are like, other characters that get married and are in queer marriages, and so it's just not a thing. And it's like, why does it need to be a thing? We got a whole like tyrant king ruling over everybody. We don't need that to be the issue. And in general, I really liked the world building in here. This isn't a very Tolkien-esque book, which again maybe makes it a little less Dungeons & Dragons because there's not like elves and gnomes and such. It has its own magic system based on these magic rocks that either fall from the sky or are dug up from the ground, that once they touch a thing, they become like the wielders of that thing. And then whoever has that rock first can magically wield that thing. So yeah, it might be something like water or fire if that's what it lands in, but also my personal favorite was the one of these rocks that lands on a bird, and then that person is like magical wielder of birds, which that is some stupid homebrew Dungeons and Dragons nonsense, and I love it. That is exactly what would be in someone's homebrewed campaign. So I love the new fantasy ideas in here. I love the fact that it's queer norm. I love the growing like adventuring party dynamic, and of course our Dark Prince with his Zuko's redemption is hiding the fact that he has ulterior motives, and you know it's all going to come out, and there's big betrayals, and it's just a great book. And it's a while that since I've reviewed this one, and I'm kind of low-key bummed that the sequel, I don't think has come out yet. I might have to look into that. Regardless, if you want to learn more about this book, I will post my review for it down in the description below. Up next is Claimed by the Orc Prince by Lionel Hart. This is an arranged marriage MLM romance all about an arranged marriage between the Prince of the Elves and the son of the Orc chieftain. So Tegan, our prince, and Zorvut, a good Orcish name, are arranged to be married to help cement this new peace between the Elves and the Orcs, because of course they're just coming off a war. And this book doesn't have the group dynamic of like a traveling adventuring party, but it has one of my other favorite fantasy tropes, and that is orcs as the non-evil protagonists. It's been a discussion in the Dungeons & Dragons fandom for a very long time, this concept of why have we written off entire races as evil? That is based on some very outdated and very hinky historical mindsets that really should not exist in the modern day, especially not when it is well accepted that most orcs or orc-like species in high fantasy are very clearly based on black people. Like that's not a hot take. That's just accepted at this point. So I love books in which orcs get to be the main characters, or at least one of the main characters. And in this one, it's an adorable MLM romance. Now, two things. One, the author is either a man or mask. Pronouns are he, him. I don't know any more than that. However, this book also has some Omegaverse properties. Nothing overt, nothing over the top. It does reference men being able to carry babies in this world. However, you do not see that on page at all. And there are some other aspects of Omegaverse that I can't talk about without this getting way too graphic. However, again, you cannot convince me that there has not been a D&D campaign that was Omegaverse with homebrew, like that they had a race homebrewed to have Omegaverse properties. Because in this book, only the elves have those properties. The orcs do not, and so they kind of use that to explain exactly what's going on to the reader through Tegan explaining what elves are like to Zorvut. And it's actually kind of a cool backstory to them, because they talk about how the fact that like early on in their evolution, elves were actually monogendered and only developed different like biological characteristics later, and so a lot of the two what looks like two different biological sexes still maintain a lot of the same qualities from once being like a monosex. Like that's a really fun idea and a really cool way to explain Omegaverse tropes. I really like that. But in general, this is an adorable romance. I believe the romance so much. Admittedly, there are some other look at the evil barbaric orcs thing that happens later, but Zorvut is perfect himbo material. Love him. And just in general, this was a really fun book. Also a really steamy book. There are erotica moments in here. Obviously, it's Omegaverse. And it is the beginning of a trilogy. And it gives you a giant cliffhanger at the end to set up the conflict for the rest of the trilogy. And it's really cool. And I really need to get back to this one because it was just really nice. The next one is Queen of All by Anya Lee Josephs. This is a sapphic YA fantasy all about the character that would have been a simple side character in another book, but it's now her turn to be the protagonist. So Jenna is not a chosen one. She does not have this mysterious noble family upbringing. She was not the one brought to this peasant village when she was a child to be hidden away and is now discovered and must go to court. That's her best friend. She's been a peasant girl her entire life. And also, she's pulled in to go to court with Cece to go and marry the dude who is probably the villain. And the biggest problem is that Jenna's in love with Cece, secretly pining some of that good lesbian in love with the straight friend trope nonsense. And I know that people can get tired of that trope. And to be fair, and this might be a slight spoiler, but I feel like if you're looking into this book, you will want to know this before you decide to read it. No, Cece does not turn around and suddenly be like, oh no, wait, it was you all along. she does have a separate romance, but I liked the underdogness of Jenna throughout the entire story. She's being pulled along to court, and at first she's like, no one notices me, I'm just in CC's shadow. But over time she's like, no one notices me. I can sneak around. I can find stuff out that CC, who always has eyes on her, can't. I can be sneaky. Like, it's great to see that growth in her, where she's like, you know what, screw you. If you're not going to make me the protagonist story, I'm going to make myself the protagonist. And you're like, yes. and I said that in my review, which of course link in the description, that it definitely felt like the story did not give her protagonist status like it gave CC blatantly. She gave herself it through her actions and through her decisions rather than the family she had come from or the fact that she was in this arranged marriage. And I loved that. I also loved the sapphic angst, obviously. This is also the beginning of a series, so I'm excited to see where it goes next. And I think moving forward, it'll likely be Jenna as more of the protagonist, not so much the best friend, which I also like. You know, she's growing. She deserves to be the protagonist of the next book. And in general, this is great, especially for people who maybe don't do a lot of high fantasy, because the fantasy elements are much lower. Like, there's like stories and tales, but there's not a lot of like magic systems you need to know about. It's a lot more like medieval court intrigue. So if you like those kind of things, you'll probably like this one. Or, you know, if you like the lesbian pining for the straight friend trope, you'll probably also like that as well. Up next is Tavern by Destin J. Munden. This is a more cozy slice of life high fantasy, but it does have some like big BBEG elements in it, and it low-key feels like cheating putting it on this list because this book was basically made to be like a D&D campaign. I mentioned in the review of this that it literally felt like you were sitting with a group of friends as they were playing the game, and you could almost imagine like the group bickering amongst themselves. And this is all about a orc named Zelnath who leads this like guild of sneaky people, rogues essentially. And there's actually not too much of a plot to it. A lot of it is just them hanging out, like I said, slice of life. However, there is like a big villain kind of hovering over the group and a lot of world building. I think that was my biggest problem with this. Now granted, I am not the best with high fantasy at the best of times, so really thick world building is not always my cup of tea, but I really liked the group dynamic. I liked the really silly elements. At one point they are going, oh, I forget the name for it, but it is in essence high fantasy skateboarding, and it was great. There is also some queer elements in this, in that there is this sapphic couple who are like dancing around the subject of the crush they clearly have on each other, and like the other people in the group are teasing them for it, and there's a lot of shut up, I don't like her, like, but also she totally does, and I love that. And also, I really like this one for the take because this book has an orc protagonist, like I mentioned before, but is also written by a Black author. And like I mentioned before, orcs have traditionally been basically high fantasy representations of the Black community in high fantasy. So I really liked that it was a Black author basically taking back that stereotype. And you can see it a lot because there are times when, you know, when Zelnath goes to the higher ups to do things for plot purposes, he code switches. He has to switch the way he talks because he knows that the way he naturally talks will be looked down on by these hoity-toity bourgeoisie elf types. And I loved that subtext in it. And in general, I just love orcs as the main protagonists of everything. I just needed to be like a whole thing, please. But in general, I really liked this one. I think I might have given it 4 stars. Like I said, I can't get into lore building very easily, and there's so much of it in here. But Zelnath is a lovable character, and the group dynamic is so good. And even if I wasn't super invested in the BBEG when he finally rocked up, it didn't matter because I'd already enjoyed the story and the group, which really was the point of it in the first place. So it's a little bit of a thicker boy, but I highly suggest this one as well. Up next is The Crystal Eye by Blake R. Wolfe. This is admittedly a bit darker of a high fantasy than the others because it talks a lot about slavery. Our protagonist, Dusk, has been enslaved for almost 10 years in the mines, and the mines have a rule that once you've been there for 10 years, they ship you off because you're apparently like too broken by that point or something. And so it's on the eve of being shipped off that he discovers that there is a dragon skeleton in the mines and a gem in one of its eye sockets. He removes it. We have our MacGuffin. Things begin to happen. Now, this is a queer norm world. One point after he manages to get away, he comes across an older woman who was married to another woman, and other characters mention her, and it's just like out and public that she was married to a woman. So there's not any like we have marriage equality in this high fantasy world, even though it also has slavery. You can't win them all. In this world, however, slavery is not specifically for any one group of people. It's basically poor people, essentially. Any urchin that does not have parents to claim them can be snatched off the street and turned into slaves. So it's a little bit more like ancient Rome rules of slavery. And a big part of the plot is Dusk meeting up with this group of rebels who are trying to end it entirely. And of course they travel, and of course he meets people, and you can kind of see the party beginning to form. Now, I don't think you see the full party formed by the end of this book, because there's only 3 of them. So I think if you want like the full found family dynamic, it's probably going to be a slow burn. You're probably going to see it as it goes on. I do not know if anyone else in the book is queer. I could kind of see where a romance might be happening in the future, but now, like I mentioned, this is very dark. It doesn't have a lot of the levity that a lot of the other books on this list do, but as we all know, in Dungeons & Dragons, a staple of the game is an angsty, dramatic backstory. And that is Dusk. Dusk has that angsty backstory. There's another character like Lex who is from a noble family, but they were abusive. Like this is very much the D&D is my therapy campaign, if you're wondering. And I'm hoping to see more queerness down the line. I also liked a lot of the morality aspects of Dusk versus Lex, our young, he's not an elf, but he gives me such elf vibes from the nobility, and the way they view the world based on their upbringings and how different it is. And then we have Tara later on, who I was like, barbarian vibes, but then I'm thinking, no, Oath of Vengeance Paladin. I was doing that the entire time with all of these books, actually being like, what am I thinking? What class are we here? For if in case you're wondering, Dusk 100% warlock. It's not even a thing. But regardless, I am really intrigued to see where this book goes next. It even calls itself an LGBTQ fantasy and talks about Dungeons and Dragons in the synopsis. So even if it didn't have all of the levity of some of these other books, I am really excited to see where it goes next. And lastly is Legends and Lattice by Travis Baldry. This is a cozy high fantasy all about an orc that decides she's over the adventuring life. She wants to open a coffee shop. Just one problem. No one in this city knows what coffee is. And it's great because she sucks at explaining it so much. She's like, it's like tea, but like not really. And basically, you see her creating this entire establishment. You see the last monster she kills to find the MacGuffin she needs to go do the thing, and you see her building the entire establishment with the help of carpenters and other people that come along to help her develop this, and you see like the menu growing, and you see the customer base growing, and it's so sweet and cute and adorable and cozy because it's supposed to be. Now, it's not entirely without any stakes. There is a kind of element of danger underneath it, and there's also a big moral development in Viv because she's basically afraid of falling back into that adventuring life of, killing and asking questions later. She doesn't want that anymore. She wants to be quiet. She wants to have her little coffee shop. And there's also a little sapphic romance in here, and it's adorable. We have Tandri, who comes partway through the book because Viv needs help, running the place and working the front counter and such. And Tandri is a succubus, meaning that she has horns and a tail and different colored skin, and is under a lot of prejudices from other people because of what she is, and she kind of feels like she has to hide herself, and she's a tiefling. She's a tiefling, but you know, the author didn't want to get sued. So we went with the much more copyright friendly succubus. And she does have like certain levels of like emotional power that she keeps hidden most of the time. But yes, tiefling, orc, sapphic romance in the high fantasy coffee shop. It's great. I love it so much. And this one has low-key taken off. I've talked to a lot of other people who have read this book or have it on their TBR or have just started it, and they all love it too, which is really awesome because this is, I believe, the indie author's debut, from what I could tell about him. He has done a lot of narration for audiobooks in this similar genre, a lot of lit RPG type of things. But this, as far as I can tell, was his first book that he's ever written, and it's fantastic. Like, a lot of indie authors have a struggle, especially with their debuts, getting their name out there. So that he's gotten this much attention is awesome. And that it's on a sapphic book with an orc protagonist is even better. And 100%, there are entire campaigns that an orc running a coffee shop and inventing iced coffee. She invents iced coffee in this book. It's great. I love it so much. And it's also perfect if you want something more low stakes, because I know sometimes you just want to chill and vibe in a high fantasy world and you don't want to have to face a gigantic evil wizard person. You're like, I just want to vibe. I just want to hang out with orcs and elves and vibe. And that's the perfect book to do it with. She does have some conflicts, obviously it's a story, but they're overcome with fairly low stakes, one excluded, but even that has a very warm and fuzzy resolution to it that I love. And there's a lot of emphasis on Viv getting the right people together to help her. So there is a found family aspect. It's very much a case of this cafe would not have gone off the ground if she did not have the carpenter, the baker, the, assistant, all the people around her that she did. It wouldn't have worked. And so it's very much a found family, you need each other vibes, which is very much D&D. And in general, all of these books. I recommend all of these books, obviously, but this one is just so good. And those are all the books I have for you. For now. Because the literal morning that I was filming this, literally sitting there waiting for my hair to dry so that I can do all this and film, I was on Twitter. And I discovered another book that would have been perfect for this list. And I low-key did think about, pushing this back to read it, but then I was like, it's been a while since I put out a fun video and people are looking forward to this one, so we're just going to go with it. But that also means that I'm already going to get started on the sequel to this list. So if you have any books, preferably indie, but I do sometimes read trad. So if you have any queer high fantasy books that give you some of the same vibes as a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, please let me know, either in the comments below or on my Twitter or whatever. I would love to hear about them, because this is just one of my favorite genres and pretty much the only way I enjoy high fantasy anymore. Regardless, with nothing else to say, I hope you have a wonderful day and a marvelous tomorrow.